Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. Thank you for tuning in. For those of you that tuned in about 2 weeks ago, you saw that I finally took the R35 Gtr out on the track. This week, I want to kind of talk about what it was like, what we did to prepare to go to the track, our expectations, the actual experience, and how it changed my philosophy when it comes to working on this car. Now, you may be wondering, I am about a week late. I did miss a week on uploads, and the reason why is I did shoot this video before, but when I got home, there was an issue with the audio. For some reason, it didn't record, so I'm doing this a second time. With me, as usual, here is Mike, PXDN Ninja. He was actually out on the track with me with his Lancer. So we're gonna talk about, like I said, our expectations and how we prepared to go, and our experiences, because I had a GTR and you were out there and just the Lancer, like you didn't even have your GTR. So he had a completely different experience. And then how our complete thought process when it comes to race cars has now changed. So go ahead and stick around and we're gonna walk you through all that. Before we get there though, if you like automotive content, particularly GTR, go ahead and subscribe to my channel. If you would like to support the channel, go ahead and check out the JD Archer shop. If you go to jdarcher.bigcartel.com, you can see a limited selection of hats, t-shirts, and hoodies that I have for sale. But now that that's out of the way, let's go ahead and get to the content. So the first thing that I want to talk about was what we did to get prepped to go to the track. Now, for me, I had to do a little bit of work on the GTR. As you saw a couple weeks ago, I installed the brake brace because I know when you're going around a track, particularly Streets of Willow, which is a very tight track, brakes are important. So you saw that was pretty much the only track prep I did to this car. And of course, did you do anything to the Lancer?
I got a tank of gas, that was about it.
You got a tank of gas.
This thing is my daily driver, so I cleaned it up a little bit, took some junk out of the seats to just keep it from blowing around, and put a fuel tank in, or some fuel in the tank, and we're good to go.
So basically, when we headed out there, we had I would say I'm probably about 95% stock, because all I've got then is the brake brace. I got steel braided brake lines and a Y pipe and catback, and that's it. And a completely stock Lancer. It's not even Evo, it's a Lancer. Now, we also did some prep to learn the track in that we had some fun. We have Gran Turismo Sport, and we said that Streets of Willow is actually an option on that game. So we spent the night kind of playing around with that.
Spent a few hours playing it back and forth, going both directions and everything.
Exactly, and I think that was great because it did kind of prep us for the general overall layout of the track. But it was kind of amazing because there was that one section of track where when you're actually there, you go through it pretty much blind. If you're going, that would be clockwise when you make that big roundabout at the bowl.
After the bowl,
Yep, you go through there. On the video game, we're flying through it at like 90 miles an hour, slamming on the brakes. But when you're actually there, there's a little bit of an incline and a decline, so that whole area is blind and it kind of jukes on you. So,
well, we also, and I remember this when we were playing the game, we were using the camera that's on the roof of the car. Instead of the in-car cam, and had we been on the in-car cam, I think it would have probably been a little more realistic. But it's also a video game, so there's a whole different fear going that corner at 100 miles an hour when it's a video game versus when you're in a GTR or even in a Lancer. You're like, oh, there's consequences if I mess this up.
Exactly. So you go off the track in a video game, it flashes, it picks up your car, moves it, puts it back on the track. You do it in this or that, you're like, I got to replace some tie rods. Yeah. So that was pretty much the only prep we had. We really didn't do anything crazy. Like I didn't, get extra tie downs or get a fuel cell or an electric cutout. I didn't even have a roll cage or a fire extinguisher, which I'm really surprised I got away with.
Yeah. But I guess they just figured we either weren't going to go fast enough, or because we were like the only people on the track, maybe it was a little more lenient on that. I didn't even have the helmet, so I had to rent a helmet when we got there. So.
I fortunately had my old helmet from my motorcycle days, and it's kind of nice to kind of knock the cobwebs off of that and actually use it again. Now to talk about expectations. Now, when you're going to a track and you're very rookie, in my case, I think I haven't even been at a track for probably about 15 years, and I had the RX-7 at the time. My expectations were, I actually thought I was going to be very conservative with the car. I thought the car was going to handle very, very well, and I thought that because I'm on Continental Extreme Contact tires, I thought that those were what was going to give me the issue. And yeah, so when I went there, I wasn't expecting to break any track records. I wasn't even expecting to be extremely good, but it was going to be great street time. And I figured, this car's pretty much just a race car that was street legal, so it wasn't really a lot I had to worry about. Where you had a different expectation when you went.
My expectation for this thing, as it was to drive around and just have a little bit of fun on a lap or two, and then hop in your car and see what a real sports car on that track would do. Ended up actually learning quite a bit about this, doing it as much as I did. The biggest expectation I had, honestly, was that this would be crap around the track because it's front wheel drive and I don't like front wheel drive.
Stock suspension,
stock
which you got like a 4-finger gap.
Yeah, it's the stock ride height. I mean, I've never modified this car in any way. I mean, I had stereo playing through part of the track. I was just having fun. So I was just cruising with it, having fun with it, expecting, okay, it'll go around the corner, but surprisingly did really well for being what it is. So I can see where it comes from, but it is a different beast, especially handling, all-wheel drive versus front-wheel drive. You could definitely feel the difference.
So you were just expecting, like, I'm going to take it out there just to have the excuse, but it's really not going to be that much.
Yeah, I wanted to put the track sticker on the back, and I'm like, it has to do 1 lap, and then after that, I'll be done. I'll race in that car and have fun with that. And then I ended up just like, oh, track times are pretty good. And I didn't take it off the track, which was my important thing. I was like, I don't want to spin out. Yeah. And I was honestly afraid I might, because you said you've been on a track like 15 years ago. This is my first time ever on a track. Yeah. So I was like, that first practice lap we did, I was nervous. I was like, oh, don't make a fool of myself. But then after about 2 or 3 laps, I'm like, oh, this is great. I loved it. So.
All right, so now we're gonna get to the real meat and potatoes of what this video is gonna be about. And that was the overall experience at the track. Now that I know a lot of people that have GTRs, they'll go FBO and, they'll brag about their horsepower numbers and they might take it to a drag strip. As far as I understand, there's very few R35 GTRs who actually will track their car. And so this might be what you're most interested in. And for me, my experience in the car was not exactly what I was expecting. And to be honest, it was all my fault because I didn't plan properly. And the issue I had with this car is 1, it is ridiculously fast. 2, it does corner very well. 3, the stock suspension, I don't feel the need to change it because I put it in R mode and it was great. Where I ran into issues was something I didn't think was going to be an issue at all, and that was my brake pads. Now, I honestly thought because, everybody likes to run Michelin Pilot Sport, like Cup 2s or Cup 4s, and I'm just on Continental Extreme Contacts, I thought that my tires were going to be an issue, and they weren't. They actually gripped pretty well. The issue I had was my brake pads, after about the 5th lap, turned to chewing gum, and they just did not grip at all, and it affected my entire day. I remember I was coming down the straightaway going counterclockwise, and I went to hit the brake. Now, I got there about 2 hours before everybody else because everyone decided to sleep in. And I came up to that corner and I hit the brakes and they turned to chewing gum on me. The car did not want to stop. It kept going straight. And I was very fortunate because that particular corner, even though I'm coming in at about $129, is kind of an entrance, exit, and skid pad area. So if you watch the video, there's this area where you turn, and it has this long stretch, at least probably, 40, 50 yards of pavement. So I don't have to worry about hitting a wall. I don't have to worry about going off track in the dirt, and thank God for that because the car didn't want to stop. And that affected my entire rest of the day because I was early braking into every corner. I was only maybe like 3/4 throttling because I just didn't trust the brakes. And so my experience with the car, even though I realized this is gonna be a great track car and it has lots of potential, I was not using all that potential because the brake pads failed. In fact, when you guys first got there, I got off the track and they point out your brakes are on fire. Yeah. They were smoking, they were steaming, so that's on me. I know next time I go to the track, which I will do, or at least do some autocross events, investing in brake pads is a must for this car. Now, you had a completely different experience in the Lancer.
I did, yeah. The Lancer actually held up surprisingly well. Like going around, when I first got there, the first thing I saw were your brakes on fire. And I'm like, I have stock pads and just basic stock rotors. I'm not going to do well in this. But surprisingly, they held up well enough. But again, to be fair, this car is maybe 150 horsepower at best. So it didn't go very fast around the track. At best, I was lucky to get up to 80 on the straightaways because by the time I got there, it was time to hit the brakes. So it actually handled surprisingly well, and you were able to take the corners and have a lot of fun with it. I had a blast driving it around. Your car terrified me. I learned a lot in both vehicles. I learned a lot in my car on what this car could do and how to run that track. But I did drive in your car, and I knew you were having the brake issue, so I'm like, well, I'm not going to go very hard on the brakes. But I also was like, I've driven fast cars in games. I've driven a lot of different cars, but the truth is I've never driven a car with that much power. And so getting out there in that car and realizing just how intense that can be at full tilt, because I mean, I've driven this car on the road out here. When we got on it, we did launches out here before.
Oh, yeah.
And so I've felt the speed this car can have, but it's a different thing when you're like, okay, I'm gonna do this launch and then we'll slow down, we're gonna go. And then trying to maintain that speed through corners, knowing the brakes are kind of having their little issues and stuff. I was like, I think I did 2 or 3 laps and I was like, okay, I'm driving and I don't feel comfortable. I'm worried when to mess the car up. At one point I shifted and the car didn't shift because I shifted at a bad time. And it's like, I got you, don't worry. I'm like, I'm screwing this up. I'm just gonna get off this track. I need to know this car better before I try to drive it. So that taught me a valuable lesson that made me happy to have this car, because I think it being lower power and just an easier general drive taught me a lot about how to drive around a track before jumping into something like that. So,
and that's something I definitely agree with, and that's something that some of you might make a comment on, and you're more than welcome to do that, is that I felt that this car was actually too much power for me, at least for Streets of Willow. Now, the R35 Gtr, obviously not this one, does hold one of the track records for that track. But for me, it was like, I kind of wish I had a lower powered car. I actually wish I had like a 120 horsepower car, because then I maybe could have gone full throttle. I could have really pushed it through the corners. Where with this one, I mean, yeah, it's having the brake issues, but at the same time, it's like also in your head, you're like, well, you know, if I crash this car, that's like a $70,000
exactly,
mistake.
yeah.
But where, you know, this, you know, something like this, I felt like, you know, I could have maybe pushed it to the limit a little bit more. I could have really kind of pushed the corners, you know, did late corner braking. So in that, I'd recommend, if you're thinking about going to the track and you only have a GTR, by all means, take the GTR out. But if you have a car, even like a Lancer or a Miata or even a Honda Civic, and there's a track day and you're debating whether or not to go, because I think you're going to enjoy it more than I did, because you're at the same level as the car. You're not dealing with a car that's just going to completely outperform what you can do.
Exactly.
Now, I'm sure there's going to be some of you out there like, oh, well, you can't handle your car. And I'm like, you know what? You're probably right. You know, let's be honest. You know, I've had fun in the canyons. You know, I've, you know, played around, you know, on surface streets. Not going to say where. But when you're out on the track, it is a completely different ordeal. And I kind of wish that I could have like maybe even taken maybe like 100 to 200 horsepower out of this car. And that way it would have been more within my level of driving. Now, it's interesting to note, so I was on the walkie, and it was interesting because, you know, we had the flaggers there, and I was on walkie with the flaggers, and I was hearing all their comments, and they were hilarious. There's certain people that were constantly getting into trouble because they weren't following rules.
Because there was more than just 2 of us. There was like, how many of us? There was 6 or 8 of us? 10 of us? There you go, yeah.
But I heard probably the best compliment about you. So I heard we were all kind of off the track, kind of towards the end of the day, and all of a sudden I hear the Lancer's coming out for another couple laps real quick, followed by, shh, what do you mean real quick? You know?
Just fair.
But then the flaggers said, well, at least he's doing it right. And they didn't say that about anybody else. So whatever you were doing on the track, I think because you weren't as concerned about, you know, having the overpowered car, having issues with the brakes, you were able to learn the track better, you were able to figure out your lines better, and I think you were actually able to improve much more than me or really anybody else that was there.
Yeah, I don't know how much anyone else improved, but I do remember I got addicted to that, looking at that time sheet every time it came up, how much faster can I go? And I don't remember the first, because we went around counterclockwise first, that was a slower path. And I did like a few laps when we were doing our run, and I think my time was like 2 minutes or something, which I was like, I don't know. Yeah, I was like, I don't know. Yeah, 2:09. I was like, I don't know what the time on this lap should be. I'll take it. It's good. But we had a guy there, Sean, who has a track-built Miata. He knows that track. He's done thousands of laps around it.
Oh, yeah.
And we were talking. I was like, here, you want to take my car out? So I went out with him, and he put in like a two flat, like 10 seconds faster than me. But he's flying around the corner, skidding the tire. He showed me a totally different line from what I was thinking. And I'm like, okay, well, maybe I can improve my time a little bit. So at that point, that's when I got in. I just started really seeing how the lines worked on the track. Started learning how to read other people's lines on the track, but not the ones that go straight off the track.
Oh God, that was so funny.
So I did a lot of learning through there, and that like I said, that hooked me on wanting to go out. I drove your car, like I said, for a few laps, but there were times where both of these would be sitting there. It's like I could take out the one I want before I drove it. It's like, ooh, now's my chance to go out in the GTR. But immediately I would go, yeah, but I can work on my lap time, and I'd hop in this car and go. So it was, for like I said, for a pure stock car, it was great. And if I put tires on it, honestly, if I had just checked my air pressure and maybe made it a bit better, I think I could have still shaved a second or two off. So I got real addicted real fast trying to get around there quickly. But yeah, it was just being consistent. You know, you only need like up to third gear on this thing each.
Oh yeah, I never got out of third gear except on the straightaway.
Exactly, yeah. So the way a track is set up, and one thing I thought about is, you talked about, you know, yeah, we take these cars out on the canyons and we'll take them out, you know, on the street and have a little bit of fun. But a track, yeah, it's a different beast because the track's intended for you to go fast.
Yeah.
Like when you're on the canyon or when you're on the streets, those aren't built for you to go fast, so you're forced to slow down and kind of stay within a slower range that you're more used to, and you're in a car you're more used to. Once you're on that track, those turns are designed for you to carry as much speed through and go without the worry of oncoming traffic, without the worry of street traffic laws. So you're flying, and that really puts a whole new spin on what you're doing. And that really, the first couple of laps for me, like I remember a couple of times on the track, I would try to stay on the correct side of the road because my instinct is like, I don't want oncoming traffic. Yeah. Because I know I'm on a track, I can just be wherever I need to be. So I started working on my line that way. So. And
I kind of had the same issue. This is really interesting. Like it's about halfway through the day that I realized this, that I wasn't using the whole track because I'm so used to, yeah, I'll cut yellow lines if I can see through it sometimes on the back road, but sometimes on these canyons, you're going around a corner and it's a blind corner, so you're staying in your lane. And I was instinctively only using half of the track, or usually half of the day. I had to physically, in my head, go, no, you can use the whole track. And I mean, that really kind of straightened out the curves a little bit more.
Oh yeah.
That was an interesting thing. I didn't think that was going to be a thing, really. I thought, like, okay, you know, high, low, high, eat up the whole track. But it's one thing to think that, but it's another thing when you're doing it at like 80 miles an hour around a 90-degree turn.
Right, and like I said, we were doing the sim stuff, and we were doing it right on the sim, but then we get out on the track, and when you're actually driving the car, muscle memory kicks in. Yeah. You know where you're supposed to be on the road, so you do that. And then it was like I said, it was when Sean took me out, and he drove the tires off this thing. We were keeping up with some of the Audis that were on the track in this thing.
The e-tron, yeah.
Yeah, and I was just like, I don't know. I never got scared when he was driving my car, and I was watching what he did. Now, he took me out in your car when we were going clockwise, the faster way, and we hit that blind section, and that is the first time I have ever been scared in a car. Like, I genuinely went, kind of freaked for a second, and he just brakes turned in. I'm just like, okay, that's okay, that's how that looks now. I'm good. And I went out with him in that before I even took this out there. So that was like my first experience of that blind intersection. I was like, okay. And then we came around the next time, and that's when I realized we didn't even have the car set in our mode. So I'm like, oh, we should probably do that. And he's like, well, we got to pull over anyway because of the brakes. I'm like, okay. But we pulled over, and I immediately jumped in this car. I'm like, all right, let's go do it.
I think that's probably a fear too, is like you also knew that the brake, like you knew that it was a tricky area. You know there's that 90-degree corner at the end, and you know that these brakes are not holding. Oh yeah. I'm sure that added to the fear.
It was a little bit of that, plus everyone said, you know, there's that blind corner will come on. And I'm like, okay, cool. And I'm like, blind corner, you don't see it, you know it's there. It's a totally different beast to actually see the blind corner, and like, I don't actually know what the next turn is. I've done this a dozen times on the simulator, and I've driven this the other direction. I know the shape of this track, but when you're, first off, not driving the car and you're flying, you just blank. You're like, oh no, what's next? And then you're there. By the time you remember what's there, you're already 2 turns down. Yeah. And that was an awakening, and that's where I know I saved on going that way. I saved a lot of time, was learning how that blind corner and trusting that I don't see, because you come up and it's like a little bit of a turn, but the blind turn actually shifts. Yeah. So you have to just look at a road that's going straight and just turn, knowing that when you crest this hill, the road's going to turn.
Well, not only that, but your apex is here on this side, and then there's another apex right here on this side.
Yeah, you immediately have to adjust.
So you're kind of going straight, but you're also kind of curving at the same time.
Yeah, your line, you're like, if I go straight on the line I'm going to take, I'm off the track if this is a straight spot. Yeah. But it's this weird curve, and you just have to trust it's there. And once you gain that faith, both in the track being there, because obviously it will be, but in your car's ability to handle what you're about to do, you can start really shaving time off. But it's a lot of gaining trust in multiple situations that you just have to go, I know it's there, I'm just send it, basically. You just have to send it and hope it works. And that's where you really start. And by the end, I wasn't nervous taking that turn at all, but every time you come up on it, you're like, it's that corner, right? You have to do it just right.
So one of the things that was an interesting experience with the track that I'm very glad that we had was Sean was actually there. Yes. Because there's a corner there that when we played it in the video game, it seemed like it was just a standard 180, and they call it the bowl, and it's actually a progressive. So if you're coming at it clockwise, it's a very easy corner to kind of get around. But when you're coming at it counterclockwise, the curve kind of comes like this and then it gets real sharp. And he showed us, and I would have never thought of this, is you actually gun it straight through to almost the tip of the corner, and then you cut back in, you almost turn it into almost like a triangle. And so that was interesting because even what I thought I knew about corners wasn't 100%. So I actually learned something with that.
That was, yeah, when he did that, when he took out my car and he did that, I was like, oh, this makes much more sense. And I had noticed on the lap before that corner always felt weird. Like I always felt like I did it wrong, but I didn't have any understanding of why. And when he did that, I was just like, I said he didn't make me nervous in my car a little bit right then, because he does drive right to the edge of the road, and you're like, well, where are you going, dude? And then he cut back in, and I'm like, oh, this all makes sense now.
Especially because that was the corner we're talking about, where there's a couple of black lines that goes from the straightaway straight off the track.
Yeah, there's one that goes straight off, and then there's one that turned a little bit, like they tried to learn and they didn't learn. And then he just takes it a little further and then makes it all the way around. Thankfully put down some track marks, so that gave me a apex mark to look for.
But halfway through the day with all of us yahoos out there who have no clue what we're doing, you couldn't really follow track marks.
Nope, not anymore. At that point it was all, do you know the track? And a little bit.
So if you ever go to Streets of Willow, there's what's called the bowl, and when you get there, it's what everyone refers it to, and that is the tricky corner that we're talking about. So even like as I've read Going Faster, which is the Skip Berber book for their race school, which is a great book if you haven't read it. And even then, thinking I knew the little I knew, I learned that I did not even know the little that I thought I knew.
Yeah. It's the difference between, you know, knowing something and having experience with something. I mean, I mean, like I said, we practice on the sim, but really that's just learning the what you're supposed to do.
The general layout of the track.
Yeah, the general layout, and like, okay, you do this, you do that. But when you're actually doing it and you're not just using a little forced feedback wheel, but you've got 1 or 2 tons of steel that you're actually flinging around a track, yeah, it's a totally different beast.
And I mean, that's why people always say there's no replacement for seat time. I mean, you can read all the books that you want, you can play all the video games you want, you can picture it in your head as much as you want. But until you're physically out there, man, things change just so fast. Probably depending on the car you're driving.
Oh, I'm sure, well, absolutely. I drove both of these, and like that was a totally different, when I went out, I'd driven this for probably like 20 laps or so before I got in that. And when I got in that, it felt like I had never driven that track before. Like it was such a different thing to do. Because I was like, and if I'd been in my Skyline, I would have probably been just as different, because it would have been a mixture of all-wheel drive, but lower power compared to this, but lighter weight, so who knows how it would have felt. I also have street pads on my car, so I don't know what would have happened. But like on the Skyline even, I don't know if the Skyline would have had a similar problem. Yeah, the weight difference probably, I don't know. It would be, I really want to take that out there, which I didn't want to do before this. I want to go out in the Skyline now just to see kind of what it can do, but so.
Now, one thing that we didn't have there that I kind of wish we did, and I was thinking about later, we didn't have the cones. Because you remember, like, even in the video game, there's cones, so you can kind of like, okay, that's the cone where I need to hit my brake. You can figure out your brake point. We had no markers. So, like, literally it was like, okay, for me, because the brakes were bad, I just passed the start line. I need to hit my brakes if I'm going to make that big sweeping corner. Okay, I'm coming, if I'm going the other direction, okay, I'm coming up to that first corner, I need to start taking my foot off the throttle, applying the brakes a little bit, because it's kind of like a corner, and a sharp corner. So it was really hard to figure your brake points without those markers. So now that you know what our experience was on the track, some of the things that we figured out right away, some of the things that we kind of had to learn while we're there, now I want to talk about how pretty much, and this is true for you too, my whole philosophy on how I'm approaching cars is changing. So for those of you that are in the GTR community, everybody always thinks about like, oh, I want that 1,000 horsepower, I gotta go FBO. And I gotta admit, I was in the same class, because I've worked on the Supra, the RX-7, the Eclipse GSX, the S2000, all those. It was always about trying to get more horsepower numbers. And that's just completely dissipated for me, because as I was talking about, like, I know that my brakes are an issue. So it's really kind of pointless for me to get more power if the brakes aren't there that would let me use that power. So now I'm starting to think about things like, well, okay, really for Streets of Willow, if I go back there, because we weren't on Willow Springs yet, the 550 horsepower stock that this car has is more than I can use. But if I start getting things like, maybe I'm gonna get like Endless or Paget has really good brake pads for this car for the track only, it's real easy to just swap the pads out on this car. It takes me like, maybe like 45 minutes to swap out the pads. And I'm good to go, and I can just run these pads on as a daily. The suspension, I don't feel the need to mess with the suspension. The stock suspension on this, I think, does perfectly well in R mode. Now, this is a 2013, so I know in 2015 they put softer suspension on because that's what customers wanted for a daily driver. So it might be different from those, but for me, this suspension was perfectly fine. But from what I understand, probably doing like some sort of upgraded sway bars. I know Whiteline's got some adjustable ones for this car, so I've been looking at that. And then I think really, I mean, I may do FBO at some point, but I'm not in the hurry that I was before. And like, for me, pads, brakes, gotta get that figured out. I think just a little bit on suspension, and then it all comes down to seat time, because if I do make this faster, then I'm actually doing myself a disservice because I'm not up to the level to justify that power car. And a thought I had, and this is why it really sucks that the 240s have just got that drift tax on them. I would love to, if my wife would let me, which we all know she won't, get a track car and start off with it dead stock. Maybe shocks and springs, depending, because they're gonna be shot, and take it up to the track and learn on that, where my driving skill outpaces what the car can do, and then upgrade the car to then keep up with me. And I think a 240 would be great for that because they're not an overpowered car. They got great balance. And I think it'd be a great car to get, and then like, okay, cool, you know, I think I've kind of taken my lap car times as far as I can. Maybe it's time to, you know, start looking at, you know, some sort of fuel management system or exhaust, or maybe even do the turbo swap on it. And just kind of build the car to sit with me, whereas this one's like, I now have to catch up to the car. So if you've never been to the track and it's something you want to do, going out with the most powerful car you can get might actually be a hindrance, because like I said, you're trying to keep up with the car, where you had a much better time with yours.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, like I said, I'd never been to a track before, so my track skills were lower than I thought they were. Like every car guy, you know, I can drive just fine, but that really taught me that, you know, I've got a lot to learn, especially for something like purpose driving like that. That's a totally different beast from driving on the street or driving through canyons. And between the two of me, I was happy to drive this car because I didn't feel like this car was getting away from me at any time. I'm not skilled enough to handle that. It was always the track that felt like it was defeating me, not the car. Like if I messed up, it was usually I did something wrong in relation to how the track's laid out, or I did something wrong, I got downshifted, I probably should have stayed in third, I went to second. But that's not the car's problem, that was me learning the car. There was never a time where it was like, oh, this car is accelerating faster than I'm really able to mentally react to, or anything like that, or the handling just feels way too extreme for what I'm dealing with. So yeah, no, I was so happy to go out in this, and I agree. Like my goal now is I want to get a car to purposely go to that track, but I don't want to buy it and immediately drop 20 grand into making it, oh, it's a time attack track car. No, I'm just going to buy it, make sure it drives, take it to the track, and then yeah, as I get to where, okay, I feel like I'm pushing it to its limit, now let's increase that limit and add parts to make it better. So that's my plan at least.
Now, you actually had a huge shift, because before we went to the track, you were all about, I want to build a drift car. You were looking like, I need a rear wheel drive manual car because I want to learn to drift.
Yes.
2 seconds out on that track, he's like, I don't want a drift car no more.
Well, it's not that I don't want no more, but it's no longer my priority. If I had access to a drift car, I would love to go learning to drift. But I always thought drift would be more fun than time attack, because time attack, you're doing the same lap over and over and over, and it's all about, you know, it gets real pedantic. It's like real right on that point. And
you're shaving like tenths or hundredths of a second off.
And I was like, I think after, you know, 5 or 10 laps of that, I'm just going to be like, look, yeah, okay, I did good enough. I'm having fun, but it's starting to get too much for me to really want to focus on. Whereas drift, it's a style thing. You can always find new ways to do it. So I was like, that seems way more fun. But you know, I got out there and I was like, no, it turns out I do like dealing with that 10th or 100th of a second, trying to really shave that down. And you know, I thought if I was slower a lap after I was fast, like if I did like a 150 and then I did a 151, then I would just be angry with myself. Like, oh my God, how I've done this once before, because I do that on GT Sport. Like I'll do a time on GT Sport and then I can't hit it again, and it frustrates me. So I was like, I don't want to do that in a real car. But it turns out in a real car, it's that adrenaline of trying to hit it, and I can feel it a bit better. So I really like this. Yeah, now I would rather build a time attack track car than a drift car. So that's my goal now.
Well, I think it's actually a good call for me personally. Like, I've never really been like I respect drift for what it is, but I've never been a huge fan of it. And here's why. When you go around a track, you have the timer on the front of your car. That's your time. There's no question. That is your stat. When you go drifting, it's 3 people up in a booth that have some sort of a gut feeling like, ooh, I liked it, or I didn't. Like, oh, you had more angle, you had less angle, you're closer to the clipping point. And they give you a score based on how they kind of almost feel about it.
It's a subjective scoring system. I heard someone describe it once best, like actual track racing, that is a sport, you know, with hard rules. You know, your time is your score. Whereas drift racing is more of like figure skating. It's about, you know, how stylish, how visual can you be, and what do the judges like to see, and knowing that, they were to apply to that.
Yeah.
And that's perfectly fine. Obviously, figure skating is a big Olympic sport. That is a legitimate thing, but it's a totally different mindset. If you want a objective, I am this good and this is, you know, where I can improve, then yeah, track days and you know, time attack, that's where it's at. Or even just car racing where you have positions. But when you're doing drift, yeah, it's all about what kind of style can I throw on it, which I always think is really cool. That's why I do like drift. But I thought I would like that more than I would like time attack, and now that I've done effectively time attack around that track,
that's a time attack
that was, yeah, now that's much more fun. I'm much more excited for that.
Now here's one thing I can say though about learning to drift, and I think it'd help racing, because if you get yourself into trouble where your rear end starts to step out on you, if you've learned to drift, then at least you know how to bring yourself back into control to save yourself so you don't go off the track. So learning to drift isn't necessarily a bad thing, especially, you know, to go with time attack. But you're right, like I don't want to learn, you know, put like angle kits on the car so the wheels can get like this. It's just,
for me, if you know, living the dream, I would have a time attack car, a drift car, my daily R35, my R32. And I'd have a 20 car garage, I'd live in a trailer somewhere. So that would be the dream. But starting out, I mean, for each person, it will depend on what they like. If they really love drift, go drift. Find a track that does drift days and get out there and learn it. But don't get a high power car. Get something that can drift, but is within your skill set, and just talk to, I guess, drift community would be the best place to learn that. But for me, after doing this, oh yeah, no, I want to do the time attack. I want to get out there, make those times faster. And when I would see other people's times, I'd be like, I could beat that. Maybe not in this car, but if I updated this car, if I got new tires, and maybe if I upgraded the engine a little bit, yeah, just a little bit. I feel like $3,000 into this thing, and I think I could shave a few seconds off of that. Where I think it would start becoming like more grating on me would be when you get to the point where it's like, if I put 10 grand into it, I can shave a tenth of a second. That's where I'm gonna get to where like, at that point I need sponsors.
Is the juice worth the squeeze?
Yeah, exactly. But I think early on, you have a ton of fun with a stock. Like I'm looking at Miatas if I can find one. You know, stock Miata around that track would be fun. And
anybody who knows me in this channel knows I love Miatas. So.
But yeah, so I mean, I'm looking at that. Maybe, like we talked earlier before shooting, you know, maybe like an E46 or something, if I can find a cheap one of those. Not that that exists either right now. But something like that, something that is a lot of options for updating, but it's a good starter platform.
So if you're watching this and you actually have experience with cars and something that we're not thinking, if you can think of a good starter time attack car for Mike here, post in the comment section down below. I'm sure he'd love to hear some opinions and some ideas and where to look. Because unfortunately we've hit this time where, you know, Miatas have gone up in price. Like I used to buy them for like 600 to 800 bucks. They're great. I got a Mazda Speed Miata one for like 4,500. Now they're like 20,000. As you know, 240 SXs, just forget it really, unless you're gonna turn into a show car or
I saw one this past week for $9,000, didn't have an engine in it.
Yeah, so you almost need, because I mean they are 25-year-old cars, they are technically classic cars now. So like, what's a good modern car? What you're looking to spend? What, $3-4 grand? You can have a salvage title.
Maybe $5 grand. Yeah, salvage title.
You know, and that's something else. Like, should you really consider a salvage title? Because when you're going around those corners, if the car's been hit and that suspension doesn't align properly,
yeah, you need to know why was it salvaged? Because sometimes they salvage them for dumb reasons. Yeah, sometimes or it was stolen. Yep. Those are great salvage titles to have. But if it's salvaged because the frame cracked in half and they re-welded it, well, maybe not that one.
But yeah, so if you have any ideas for him, like, oh, you know, my first track car was this and I can get it for like $5 grand, post in the comment section down below. We'd love to hear some of your ideas, because obviously we'll bring it on the channel too and do whatever work we're gonna do to it as well. So, but yeah, that's kind of what we went through here, you know. So, you know, we talked about, you know, how we prepped for it, our expectations, our experience, which was a great experience. I'll do that again. If only the wife would let me. And then, you know, how it's really changed our philosophy about how, you know, like, I'm sure I'll make the car faster, but I don't have a huge need to do that. And you kind of got the same philosophy. You're more interested in how do I improve as a driver more than how do I improve a car.
Well, plus this car is just one I don't plan on working on to begin with. I mean, it's my daily. I take my dog out in this thing. It was really just there because, hey, I thought we should have a reliable car that wasn't going to be on the track as much as it ended up on the track, that we could run and do errands with if we needed. And my Skyline was in the shop. So.
Yeah. And even your Skyline, you're not planning on really modding right now.
Not too much, no, it's because I pretty much daily it, so I don't want to put too much into it and make it unreliable. But I also said I would never put it on a track. And after that track day, maybe I'll put it on the track once, because I want to see how it does compared to this.
You got to put it on the track.
So if we do another track day and the car's running right at the time, It'll go on the track for a few laps. Last time I said a few laps, I did 40 or 50, so we'll see what happens.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I mean, we still have actually Willow Springs, to be honest, on Streets, but Willow seems like that's a big track that a lot of people like to go. So, and apparently it's only like an extra 15 minutes drive longer than what we did to get out to Willow Springs.
Yeah.
So we do have track options. I'm hoping to hit the track at least a couple times a year, and I am thinking about doing autocross because autocross, I mean, it's going to be different than the track, but it's still a racing experience, and it's only $35, which means the wife isn't going to yell and scream at me.
There you go.
So I heavily suspect that if you are subscribed to this channel, there will be more racing content, and for those of you that did watch that racing video, you know that the camera didn't really work, so hopefully I'll get more footage, better footage, so you can kind of see what it's like to kind of race this car.
Next time I'll remember my suction cup mount so
There
we
we
can
go.
actually have interior shots.
Yeah. Either way, I hope you enjoyed this video. Like I said before, if you did, go hit that thumbs up button to let me know. If you want to see more automotive, particularly GTR content in the future, go and subscribe to my channel. I thank you all for watching, and until next time, forget everything else, focus on the finish line.